My name is Alex, and I am the Manager of Digital Experience and Programs at NC Tech. And thank you for joining us for today's virtual workshop, Unlocking the Value in Your Data, with host sponsor and NC Tech member, EverEdge Global. This session is a component of NC Tech's ongoing virtual workshop series where host sponsors cultivate content on important topics pertinent to the state's tech sector. If you would like to learn more about NC Tech, or if you would like to learn more about upcoming events like these, please head over to nctech.org for more information. Now for some housekeeping rules. If you have any questions during the session, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A function below. We'll save some time at the end to address those questions if there are any. This session is also being recorded, so I will send a recording to all registrants after this session concludes, probably tomorrow morning, as well as an abbreviated version of the slide, just for anyone who isn't able to attend today, or if you want to pass it to a colleague that might have missed today's session. And I will now pass it to Tyler and Malcolm with EverEdge to delve into data management and utilizing data to bolster organizational growth. All right, I'll let y'all take it away.
Great. Well, thank you for the time. Appreciate NC Tech for allowing us to have this time, and everyone who is taking time out of their afternoon to join us for the webinar. I'm Tyler Kapson. I'm a managing director based out of Charlotte, North Carolina for EverEdge. And my colleague Malcolm Fraser is here as a specialist with me, joining us from New Zealand. So I appreciate everyone and their time. Today, I'll pull up a little bit about this agenda, what we're going to talk about in the workshop. We do encourage questions and comments, so please throw them in the Q&A as we go through. We're going to talk about intangible assets, and people ask me, you know, what does it mean that EverEdge is an intangible asset specialist, and what do you do? And I said, well, we deal with all types of business assets, but those that you can't drop on your foot is where we kind of excel. We are based out of Australia, New Zealand, Singapore. We have global offices, and we've been around about 12 years now. And the reason that we focus on intangible assets as an asset class is mainly due to this as a starting point. So what you're seeing in front of you is the S&P 500 over the last 45 years split between tangible and intangible assets. And over this period, virtually all value has moved into intangible assets. If you go back to 1975, it was about 17%, and today it's over 90%. So when we talk about intangible assets, what are those assets that we're specifically talking about? Everything, most people tend to lean towards, oh, you're talking about intellectual property or legal rights such as IP, patents, and trademarks. But really, intangible assets cover a much broader and wider variety of intangibles than you think. For example, even if something like a steel mill, you would think is a very industrial, all fixed assets type of a business. And even a business like that, it looks predominantly like you're dealing with tangible assets, but they have a significant amount of intangibles that are required to run the business. As an example, customer lists, the software to run the mills, the compliance and the regulatory approvals that are needed to be able to safely and effectively run a steel mill. So even something like that, you need to, there's a significant amount of intangible assets. And so what we do as a consultancy and as a professional valuation company, we really help companies go through a specific process. And as we talk about today, and we talk about how to value data and get more value out of your data, the process doesn't change all that much. Really, we help you identify the assets that you have in your business and assess the strengths and weaknesses of those assets. What is strong, what is weak. Then we help you do two types of strategy. You want to make sure that you can protect those assets in the forms that you have them. So you need some sort of a protection strategy. And then second, you need a commercial strategy, which is how are you actually going to make money out of them? once you know what you have and how you're going to protect it and what you want to do with it in the market, you should have a basic understanding of its value so that you can price it appropriately, or you know how to deal with partners um, or uh, or vendors in the marketplace. So you need to do evaluation. And that allows you to actually go out and do something with it and unlock its value. And so, like the steel mill example that I gave you, you may not be able to see all of the value that is in your data, that is in your instruction manuals, that is in your software, that is in your domain name. Whatever those assets particularly are in your company, you need to ensure that you have a good way to value them. And the irony is that most individuals, whether in an organization or external advisors across all professions, CEOs and accountants, they do tend to ignore these intangible assets, and this includes data as a significant asset class because it isn't always put onto the balance sheet. A lot of times companies will do a project, collect data, and it ends up being that the data set that's collected, they know it's there and they know it has a lot of entries into it, but it didn't get capitalized onto the balance sheet. And so this actually creates a significant gap between the financial records of a business and the reality in terms of the company's overall value, really its opportunity for growth and the risks, because that's really where those intangible assets lie. And so what happens is you end up with boards and management teams that don't necessarily know where those intangible assets are in their business, or they don't necessarily know the extent of the risks. Since 90% of the value is in intangible assets, well, that's where a lot of the risk will be too. And if you don't understand where they are, the risks, you may not fully understand the impact of the financial results. I mean, a good example of this that we use is I can buy a blank T-shirt, and for let's say $2 for my cost, I can sew on a Nike brand, and I can turn around and sell that T-shirt for $50. Well, the P&L as an accountant will say, okay, revenue $50, my cost of goods sold was $2. Well, the $48 difference we just put as profits, but it doesn't ever tie back those profits specifically to the brand. Because I had that opportunity to use the Nike logo, it was, the $48 of profit was actually due to the heavy lifting of the brand. And so being able to draw that connection is really what we do and try and help. And we're going to try and show you a couple of examples of doing that with data. Once you're able to draw those connections of, I have the asset, I protected it, I know its value, and I put a number on it, you can start to unlock value and really see how you can generate more value from them. So let's talk about a couple of data values and a couple of those examples. Data is very interesting because it is like oil in that it has potential value, okay? It is expensive to actually extract value, same as crude oil is expensive to extract out of the ground, and it has to be refined. You need to do something with raw data to turn it into something. And if you don't necessarily know what you're doing, extracting that value can have significant risks and damage associated with it. Simply as emailing credit card data that wasn't properly encoded or was not properly secured, patient records, if they're leaked or if there's a hack, those types of things. We all see the big, headline news when you have a big leak or data leak like that. So the value of data really is dependent on how are you planning on using it and what the economic returns are of that data. A great case study that I love is Caesar's Palace. They actually went through a bankruptcy, okay, and they were backed by a hedge fund, and they ended up having the company was taken control of by a liquidator. And one of the things that they had was the player data and the player data cards. And it wasn't actually recorded on the balance sheet as an asset. And it was sold for something like $200,000 at the time. And the liquidators just was trying to get rid of the assets and get them to whoever would pay for the money, pay quickly as possible. Well, it ended up that, the creditors obviously sued because they never really questioned how much that data was worth. There's a Harvard Business Review or Harvard Business case study that's done, and they value that data at over $1 billion, and it would have been the highest value of asset on the balance sheet at the time had it been properly valued. And so that is a case that is still actually in courts today, and they're still trying to sort that out. So don't undervalue data just because it's not located on the balance sheet. Another one was a project that I was actually involved in, so it's a little closer to home, is I was working with a financial services group out of the UK, and they were being sold, and the investment bank that was looking at selling them told them that they'd get about 4 times earnings for their valuation. And we did a assessment of the assets. So what we did is we broke down the data, we broke down the customer lists, we broke down the software that they had. We prepared a narrative that highlighted the specific value of the data and looked at use cases of what buyers would actually want to look at that data or buy that data. And we were able to connect them with an insurance group. And the insurance company was very interested in it for various purposes, but they were more interested in the data itself. We ended up selling the data sets for an equivalent of about 32 times EBITDA for that company. We sold it as an asset sale, meaning we broke it up into its assets and sold it that way instead of an operating business, to change the way the business was looked at, to change the narrative of the discussions away from simply, oh, you're a multiple, a revenue multiple, an EBIT multiple, and in terms of, hey, this is the value of the assets in your business. So it made a significant change in terms of the value that we were able to get. Well, the problem that most companies face today is that they hear, okay, they have lots of data, right? And they don't necessarily know what they have, right? They have a lot of data, and they either don't know what to do with it or how to work with it. They don't have technical expertise, or they don't understand the quality. Sometimes they lack both, the technical and the commercial skills to actually do anything to be able to put that data into, apart from their business as usual. They say, oh, yeah, we know how to use this. It's part of our CRM. It's our marketing lists. It's our email database. But they don't necessarily know exactly how to do it. It doesn't really stop them from trying. And so in terms of evaluating that, here's a couple things that we see very often as professional valuers of ways not to do it. The first is really, well, we've got a lot of data. We've got tons of it. So let's just monetize it. Let's do it. And they go, great. Or they say, oh, well, you can buy an email address or a buyer profile for $5, and I've got 10 million associated buyer profiles, so then my data is worth X. It's not the worst way to value it, but you have to know that the quality is right. There's a lot of other factors, and most of the time it's just too far off because there's no real apples to apples exact comparisons of what's being sold and what you have. And so by trying to do that and saying, well, if the internet says it's worth this, or this database says it's worth this, therefore my data set is worth, the number of data points multiplied by that price. One thing that I always say to people is, it's similar to like eBay. Just because someone lists a pair of, Jordans on there for $1,000 doesn't mean every pair of Jordans in your closet is worth $1,000, and doesn't mean anyone's actually bought it, right? It's not even a good indication if it isn't a recent transaction that was validated by an open and free market. So data is really only usable and valuable when it's deployed and used in the right terms. You need to understand what your data users are. You need to understand the data suppliers and how they use it. You need to understand how the delivery networks work in terms of the large data aggregators and what they're using the data for and how they're using it for. And then last, the data facilitators that are creating tools and infrastructure to help supply analytics, to supply reporting, to supply storage for this data, all of this. These companies understand data. They get it because it's in their use cases. So just because you have a big data set doesn't mean they will necessarily want to buy it unless it's, something that is a digestible for them. And Malcolm's going to go into this a little bit more deeply. So if we think about, the overall ways that this stuff gets used and look at the valuation of data, this really helps us to understand that there is potential returns from data, and it exists in a way that if you know how to use it, then there's value. If you don't, or this is your first time, you got to start looking at a different way. And so you need to start evaluating the costs versus the benefits of doing something with the data. You got to objectively compare specific use cases, how you're going to use it, who wants to buy it, how you would license it, who you could sell it to. Those particular use cases need to be robust. And then, last, justifying and gathering support for the investment, whether it's from a CFO, whether it's from a board, whether it's from your tech team, to so that they can actually support and deliver that data, putting all of those pieces together. Then that allows you to just do the first part, which is just to actually value the data itself. Malcolm, our expert in data, I'm going to hand it over to you to kind of go through a little bit more with everyone in terms of how we actually would leverage that data specifically for value, especially when it's in these pools that, we don't know what to do with, right? So.
Cool. Thanks, Tyler. And now the technology challenge. Let's see if I can actually get the presentation up and going. Go on, go. Right. Excellent. So,
Great, looks good.
Yes, strategic approach. So I wouldn't really call myself an expert. I'm just someone with a lot of scar tissue. So my background's from multinational consulting in the data space, and I've worked across about, I think, in excess of 28 or 30 odd countries. So yeah, bit of scar tissue. But anyway, let's drill into it. Tyler's done a great job in terms of why traditional valuation methods don't work. But what I want to do is just come down into some of the attributes of data from a valuation perspective and why it gets so interesting in terms of how to value it, etc. Now, this deck is obviously going to be shared, so I'm not going to go through and read every single word and sentence here. But I just want to point out a couple of things that and Tyler's done a great job in terms of the intangibility and context. And that's one of the key things, is that data is highly context specific. The other interesting thing around data is that, and the technical term is non-frivolous, but you can use data by multiple parties multiple times and it doesn't get depleted. So the same data set, doesn't matter how many times you actually throw it through the processes or the pipelines, it still works. However, it also has a very short half-life. So if we think about the amount of data that's being generated from traditional transaction systems like CRMs and ERPs, but then also wearables and AI and IoT devices, et cetera, the relevance, because data is specific, context specific, its half-life can be quite short. There's no point talking about, what the P&L looks like 12 months ago, because you've got a new P&L set coming through. Anyway, some of the challenges, lack of standardization. We really don't have a universally accepted method of valuing data. There is lots and lots of research going on that in the economic space. They still haven't come to a conclusion, which is one of the reasons why we exist, but that's great. Data quality, utility, etc. So I'll drill into a few of those. However, I really want to highlight that the key challenge here when valuing data, and look, yeah, North Carolina Tech Association, you probably know this really, really well. How often have you actually come up to the board or senior leadership level to have a conversation about data, and the first thing out of their mouths is, well, hang on, no, we're talking about data, that's that technical stuff. We need to bring the IT manager in this or the CIO in. And what happens in that conversation? We wind up in a budget ask for more money. Oh, sure, we could monetize the data. We just have to get a new platform running and get a new website running, a new portal, and get some credit, and then we can actually monetize our data. The other challenge with this, that because the senior leadership really have a problem trying to work out how to value the data from a business perspective, they tend to throw it as a cost and compliance burden. This comes back to what Tyler was talking about in terms of how traditionally things have been treated from an accounting perspective. So an intangible asset or a tangible asset classes, they'll either, when an organisation is being valued, they'll either ignore them, or they'll lump it into goodwill, or worse, they'll treat it as cost. Now, we just have to look at, say, the banking sector in terms of what they do around things like data governance and et cetera, is that's down the bottom of the organisation and risk and compliance. So it's seen as a cost. So how do we actually shift those conversations into how do we value it? How do we drive money from it? How do we actually do the value conversation? Now, I wanted to just slight tangential shift there. So when we're talking about the value of data, it could be the monetization of data in terms of actually receiving income or also revenue from it, or it could be how that data adds value to your supply chain or your partners, et cetera, or even through into the public sector in terms of how you collaborate with public sector organizations to talk about, economic development in the region or climate change, et cetera, et cetera. So 6 things you can be doing to actually change the conversation: shift the perception and culture, so educate the stakeholders on the potential value of data, right, which is what we hear about here, but also promoting data literacy across the organization. A lot of times organizations actually say, well, I want a report, I'll need to talk to the IT department to get that report out. If we can actually lift the data literacy across the organization, but not turn people into data scientists, because that's not the way to do it. And then we need, obviously, as we shift that perception, develop a data strategy. Now, I want to hone in on that particular aspects, because the developing a data strategy is not about platforms or technology. It's actually about the stakeholders, the customers, what they're trying to do, and that provides the context for the data. Now, within the Data Value Accelerator at Everidge, we have a 3-step process that we run through. So data discovery, what have you got in the way of data and who cares about it? And that what have you got conversation is very much around the metadata. So what data sets do you have? What are they comprised of, as opposed to the individual record lines, et cetera. The second phase of the accelerator actually comes into that implementing data management practices in terms of taking the use case that you've defined in the discovery phase, turning that into a data product or data as a product, depending on which vocabulary you want to use. And then from those data products, actually working out a roadmap or a life cycle. We can actually use AI to, et cetera, to develop a product mindset. And one of the really interesting things about AI, not only because it's topical, is that AI will actually generate new data for you. So if you consider that you've got a data estate, you've got your transactional data, you have your chats, your interactions with customers, et cetera, et cetera. By putting AI into that context, you can actually develop new data, new product sets, et cetera. And then obviously that leads on to the option of being able to monetize and put together your data governance and compliance. So one of the key challenges when we're looking at this, so if we think about the number of the amount of data, the opportunities and the context, one of the big challenges we see is who actually owns the data. And think about it this way, that we've got the data sources of lots of different origins. might be personal information, business applications, industrial control systems like SCADAs and wearables, etc. At any stage in that data life cycle, there'll be various stakeholders that could claim ownership. Recently doing an engagement with the forestry industry here in New Zealand. And when you think about the value chain or the data value chain across forestry, you plant a tree. So there's obviously data in terms of plant varieties and where to plant them, etc. And with the forestry industry, they're planning out 30 years because that's how long it takes the trees to grow. So climate change has, the understanding how climate change impacts the environment, and where you can plant trees that they'll still survive in, say, 30 years. So that's data. Then it flows through to harvesting, weighing, measuring, turning it into logs, turning it into lumber, etc. What we found in that forestry industry scenario was that the forestry owners companies, because they were planting the trees, thought they should own the data across the whole value chain, whereas the contractors who are actually cutting down, weighing, etc., thought they owned the data. Took us about 3 months to actually work through a process which actually wound up where, excuse me, we had data products that everybody in that supply chain agreed that this is easy. If we just share this information, we're all going to be more efficient. So that was one of the key values of that particular data set, which is actually the weight of the logs, because typically they get weighed and measured about 5 times down the value chain. So everybody agreed that should be an open access data product. It's easy to understand, it's easy to share, there's no value. Whereas the data around planting trees, where to plant them, et cetera, was kept as an internal data set for the forestry owners. So very quickly, sort of to wash up here, unlocking the value of data, the accelerator program. Okay, so the data challenge, which Tyler's already gone through in wonderful detail. So the data value accelerator, we follow along. The accelerator follows the same lines as Tyler outlined earlier, but we take the data perspective. So discover and assess, what have you got and who cares about it? And then how do you turn that into use cases and data products and commercialize those? And then how do you wrap around the data management, data governance aspects to actually unlock and realize that data? Very top level, as I said, this slide deck will be available so you can drill down into it. And we really want to sort of get to that Q&A session because I'm sure there's lots of good content. Yes, there's probably lots of technical conversations and talks about data management and data mesh and data fabric. We could probably take those, or if they're too technical, we might just bat them off. But it's 7:30. We're looking for Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks, Malcolm. If you have a question, feel free to drop it in the Q&A and we will try to answer them. Or Tyler and Malcolm will try to answer them.
Or we can just chat. And 7:30 is 7:30 in the morning here.
I had an interesting client that we worked on the data process, similar to your logging example, Malcolm. We ended up they were a vendor of like packaged noodles and consumer products, like very fast turnover products in the consumer business industry. And they were doing they had about 4,000 locations, endpoints, that they distributed their product from. And they were collecting data on usage and things like that. And they wanted to know if there was value in the sales SKUs that were going off the shelves and the timing and all of this information. And we said, well, let's look into it. Let's look at the use cases of, you have this data, who else would be interested? And then we looked at, well, what other consumer products might be next to it that would also be sold at the same time? Would they be interested in using that data? Then we looked at the manufacturers of these, like ramen noodles and Instacups and things like that. And they were interested because they were saying, well, if we knew on a large scale from 4,000 locations, and that applies to this certain region, we know earlier shipping times, we know production quantities that we need to meet, we know this various information. And so we were able to actually help up the supply chain in terms of, pre-sale process by providing that data. And then we also helped provide the ancillary services and other products that were alongside, sort of at the middle, same time. And so we actually helped to, license the data to be able to generate additional revenue. And they built some partnerships where they shared the data. They got the data from other products, which was useful in that case.
Yeah. And
So
that's a really good example. All too often you wind up in this technical conversation around data. But it really comes back to that context. And I think the supply chain scenario that you just outlined is really, it's a good example, because if you take this product mindset and you say, okay, well, who in the value chain, what are the problems in the value chain that we're trying to address? And it might be that actually to address that problem, you actually need to have data from, 3 or 4 different organizations. Well, you go back to product design and product management 101. Who's the customer? What are they trying to do? How do we build a product or a solution that actually meets their needs? And so, and if we, for those of you on the call that, are sort of in the world of, data fabric and data mesh, we wind up in these data as a product mindsets and start talking about microservices and APIs, etc. If we lift that conversation back up and say, what are we trying to build here in terms of a product that works across the supply chain? And so we take that product mindset. I think that there's huge potential for that.
what's the typical size of, you sort of customer that it makes it? Because when I'm on the valuation side, so we say, oh, well, is it worth it to take the time and energy to value this? And on your side, when you go in and help them to identify it, clean it up, and prepare it, and all of that, what's the typical size of company that has a critical mass or critical size to say, yep, now it's worth it to actually do a project on this? Have you seen either, is it a size, is it industry based, is it, what you find, who are the typical good candidates you would say?
It's not really size dependent. And you've seen this many times. You go into a large multinational, right? They're actually quite simple businesses. They're large, but they've got the different departments, right? They've got manufacturing and R&D, etc., and they might have 10,000 people in manufacturing. So they've got the system set up. The challenge there is actually how you manage the data across those different silos, but they're reasonably mature in that. Where I think from experience, the interesting part is actually the mid-size, because the mid-size organizations are actually more complex than the large ones, because they're doing lots of different things. They might have systems, so their data maturity is not as, and the mid-size is probably not as large as the multinational or the enterprise organization. And so therefore, taking that mindset in terms of what are the problems you're trying to solve for your clients, how can you actually use your data? Like great example, we were talking to an outfit in Australia last week, and they've got a platform. I can't, we're under NDA, so we won't go into specifics here, but basically they have a platform. They can see the transactions flowing through their industry. So because they can see the transactions, not only from what people are sourcing, what products they're sourcing for the industry, but also what's happening around the financials, they're actually seeing final demand notices coming through from supplier to customer. And they've gone, okay, we think that in about 6 months' time, this particular sector is going to collapse because of the data that's there. Is that valuable? It's certainly valuable from an investment perspective in terms of, well, am I going to go invest in that particular sector? And guess what? The majority of the organizations that are actually on that platform are the small to mid-sized organizations as opposed to the large organizations. So I think the interesting thing about where the big opportunities are around data valuation and how to turn it into product is actually in those cross supply chains, constellations of small, medium enterprises. We have a Q&A.
Yes, we do have a question, and I can read it out loud for y'all. With the influx of AI in the market in recent months, how have you seen AI being leveraged to unlock the value of data for organizations?
Excellent. Love a little hype cycle. We've had a few in the tech industry over the years. AI is really cool, but AI is only a tool, right? So if you've, and pardon my French, if you've got crap data, you're going to have crap AI. So it really comes back to understanding what data you got, the quality, etc. Now, how AI comes into that, and Tyler touched on it before around the large data sets and not knowing what data you've got. In other words, the dark data quandary. It's proposed that probably about 80% of the data that an organization have, they don't even know they've got. It's basically being generated off the transactional systems. Now, where AI comes in, and to drive a technical term, we're starting to talk about active metadata management. So you take you take an AI, you throw it at the data that you've got or the data sets, and it'll come back and say, hey, did you know that you got 5 data sets that are actually talking about customers? Now, there's a really good example in this part of the world with a building supply company. They had a traditional ERP system that had been running for 20, 30 years. They needed to get into the new age, or at least get on the ball rolling. So they actually made a bold call and said, actually, we're going to start from fresh. We're going to throw out the old ERP. We're going to start, cloud, all the cool tools, etc. And the CIO did it right. They had data from, it was almost 40 years worth of transactions. They put an AI onto it and said, right, tell us what we've got. They found data they didn't even know they had. And then they went one step further and actually turned the AI around the other way around the data literacy, because they didn't want to turn their people, the customer service people, into data scientists. So they actually, because traditionally that's when someone who was using the data say, well, where's the data for this report coming from? And the IT department would turn around and give them an SQL statement. Oh, well, we got this from that, et cetera, et cetera. So what they did is they actually fed the SQL statements into the AI and turned it into plain language. So the customer, the person who was consuming the report, when they were saying, well, how many barbecues are we going to sell through our, 120 stores in December, the AI would say, we're going to sell this many, and this is how I got the data. So you can use AI both ways, but I think this active data management, and there's vendors like Atlan that's worth looking at. But of course, the challenge is with these AI platforms and data cataloging, et cetera, they've got a significant price tag, which tends to sit at the top of at the enterprise space, and it's missing the mid-market and the small market. So if NC Tech, members, they're thinking about what can we do around AI and data, look at that mid-market. It's an open opportunity.
All right.
There'll be more questions.
Yeah, last call for any questions. All right. Did y'all want to, Tyler and Malcolm, say anything else before we conclude? Any other kind of parting thoughts or anything like that?
I think from a timing standpoint, look, appreciate everyone taking the time afternoon. And the introduction of AI, I think, in my view, with valuation is there's a principle in valuation we use called the 25% principle. So if you solve a problem or solve a solution, typically about 25% of the value that you solved from that sort of an end to end ends up residing back to the inventor or the person who solved that problem. So it's a real sort of rule of thumb. But let's say it normally cost me $10 to produce and ship my product, and I can save $3 of that by a new shipping route, right? So of that $3, I should be able to capture 25% of that value to me as the owner or the inventor of that piece. And so we see this in intellectual property when new inventions come out, new products come out, new ideas streamline things. AI, I think, has that ability to help us make those connections faster. because we can iterate problems faster, meaning you can throw, oh, what if we do it this way? What if we do it this way? What if we do it that way? It doesn't come up with it. We still have to be the ones that load into the language model the right questions to ask to be able to stimulate a new idea or a new question that probably hasn't been thought about. But then we have to say, well, how does this then translate back to commercial? Everyone that is in their roles, whether you are a new analyst or whether you have been at your job for 30 plus years and you are the most senior person, engineer, and you know everything about the topic that you're in, we still have opportunities to grow and change and invent and build. And that's really where the whole point of this discussion really goes from, is the value of the world is moving from tangible assets to intangible assets. So an industrial age, 40 years ago, where things were valued based on how big you were, how much inventory you had, how many factories you had. Now we really are in an ideas age economy with the fastest, ideas, the most innovative ways to market, the cleverest way to attract new clients to your product. That is really the differentiation. And so really we are kind of moving away from that industrial age into a people age. AI is going to be significantly helpful to help speed and train and get us up to speed, but we will still need people to be the brains and the smarts to create those new innovations and those new ideas. And so be on the lookout, right? In your jobs, in your roles, whether you are the new analyst that is just, doing spreadsheets, you can improve that system. You can improve, and there is possibly value there. Don't discredit, just because it's a little bit unique or different, there isn't necessarily value. And a lot of smaller companies tend to undervalue their contributions in the markets. And so go through this process. If you have new processes, new ideas, new products, and new ways to think about it, especially if you're using intangible assets or unique assets, if you're using data that only you have, if you were trained from an instruction manual that is unique to your company, right? If you're following policies and guidelines that were written recently that nobody else in that industry uses yet, you very well could be doing something different and unique. And that is a time to reflect and say, let's stop and identify what we have. Let's protect it. Let's look at how much commercial value there could be, and let's put a value on it. An example is Jack Welch GE manual, training manual. So GE is well known for producing training content for management teams across the world, right? Well, General Electric didn't start out to be a training company, and yes, they're not known for that as their primary product. They sell whiteware and pretty much everything under the sun, including jet engines. But the thing is that they originally started by being very good at what they did, doing something a different way, documenting it, codifying it, and then realizing there's value there. And then they were able to sell training manuals and do seminars, and they became a consulting firm just to help other management teams. There's always an opportunity to rethink, the mousetrap. And so that's kind of the way we take how fast companies are moving. Let's look for ways to value our data. Let's look for ways to implement it into our businesses, and it benefits everybody in the firms. So that's my final wrap up, Malcolm.
We do have actually a couple of questions that have popped up. Well, you must have
great.
some thoughts. The first one we got was, how do you leverage IP or patents?
Well, it's a good one. So IP is a good one because intellectual property is a legal right. So if you have IP, which typically is covered as a patent, trademark, copyright, okay, you have the legal right to use that either product, that invention, that writing, that new material that you've created. So we leverage it by identifying who are the potential parties that would like that. In the GE example, they created a GE training manual, right? And they actually then went about and put trademarks over certain terms. They were able to get copyright over all of their manuals and, registered copyright. Everyone has copyright protection over anything you write or produce, just so you know. But by knowing what you have and then having an IP strategy, that allows you to say, well, which of those assets can we actually license? Can we partner with that and charge a fee for that? So yes, you can definitely monetize intellectual property. It's what we do. I'm a certified valuation analyst and certified valuation IP patent valuer. And so, yeah, definitely you can. So.
Okay.
And then we have time for one more question, and then we'll have to wrap up after that. But how does an organization know if they actually own their data, or if the data is perhaps owned by a platform they leverage to run their business?
There's a short answer and a slightly longer answer. The shorter answer is you have to read the terms and conditions. The long answer is, and this comes back to the Data Value Accelerator. When you're looking at where the data comes from or goes to, in the accelerator we use a data product specification, which has actually just become part of the Linux Foundation. It's called ODPS. Within that metadata specification is actually who owns the data, what's the standards it has to adhere to. No, you work out around the data lifecycle, where it's coming from, and then you find the terms and conditions that are attached to that. So sorry, yes, you do have to go and read the terms and conditions for Facebook and Amazon, et cetera, and that very quickly articulates, who owns the data off the platform, et cetera. So that's part of the process that we do when we're capturing it in the discovery phase of the Data Value Accelerator. And that was the sales pitch for this morning. Well, sorry, for this afternoon.
Awesome. Any other kind of parting thoughts from the EverEdge team?
That last question there, do you do IP work yourselves or outsource? Yes and no. So yes and yes, we do IP work ourselves. We have patent attorneys on staff. We don't file. We are not a law firm. And that is to maintain our independence, in that we do not want to give you IP advice saying, yep, go and file this, when we generate fees off of that. So the basic number one question I always tell people is saying, look, if you're looking to file patents or trademarks, always ask your patent attorney. The question is should I do this from a commercial view? They may not be the most qualified to answer it, but at least it puts them on notice that you're looking to make money from it, not just to see if you can get legal protection around it. Those are two very different questions to ask. So hope that's helpful.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tyler and Malcolm and the EverEdge team, for hosting this virtual workshop today. As I mentioned, this session was recorded, so I will send a recording of this session to all the registrants after this concludes, as well as an abbreviated slide deck. But be on the lookout for that. I'll probably send it tomorrow morning. And then if you have any questions, like I mentioned before, please go to nctech.org. But yeah, have a great afternoon or morning if you're in New Zealand. And I will see y'all next time.
Great. Thank you all for attending. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks.
Have a
Take care.
great day, all.